Welcome to Medieval Christendom, Norman Conquest, the Crusades, and the Mongol Hordes, 1066 to 1453 AD. This is Melinda Cole Klein. From 1000 to 1300 AD, Western civilization developed into a thriving medieval world, centered around the production of an agricultural surplus, while the Christian Church and its popes modeled society, trade, and politics with its ancient ideals and practices. All the while, a landed aristocracy vied for power and local authority with strong military alliances. Together this developed, though not evenly, into a government that contested the powers of the Pope in favor of secular monarchs who were often good military leaders. The culture experienced in this era a period of religious revival as practiced by Christian monks such as the Cistercians. Also, Christian spirituality mobilized its piety into an army to defend its faith against non-Christians, specifically the Seljuk Turks, Muslims in general, and Jews throughout Europe. This period of the High Middle Ages was a time of reform, conquest in the name of God, economic revival of long-distance trade and commerce with a growing population. Authority, whether papal or monarch, shifted political power and centralized government control, while the people experienced cultural, intellectual, and spiritual changes. From the age of 7, William was the Duke of Normandy. As head of state in time, he would gain political and military experience in dealing with invasions and rebellions. Upon the death of his cousin, Edward the Confessor of England, in January 1066, William claimed the throne of England because Edward had named him heir during a visit in the year 1052 AD. However, Harold Godwinson, the rich brother-in-law to Edward, believed he was heir, and leading English nobles approved of this coronation in January 1066. Meanwhile, William pursued his claim to succeed and be King of England by enlisting the aid of the Pope. With the Pope's blessing for invasion to seize the throne of England, William assembled a Norman invasion fleet of about 600 ships and an army of 7,000 men. This war is remembered as the Norman Conquest. Since 1066, England, or Britain at large, has not been conquered by a foreign power. A key battle of this war was the Battle of Hastings, fought October 14, 1066, in which the ensuing Normans claimed victory on the battlefield. By Christmas of 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The Bayeux Tapestry is a 20-inch by 230 feet long, rolling embroidered linen cloth, which depicts scenes commemorating the Norman Conquest, pre-war tensions, alliances, and the Battle of Hastings. It is annotated in Latin. The tapestry begins with a panel of King Edward the Confessor with no heir. He decides to send his trusted son-in-law, Harold Godwinson, to tell his cousin William, Duke of Normandy, that he, William, is to be the next king. Harold pledges his alliance to William on the bones of ancient relics. Or was this a trick? But when Harold returned home, some interpret the tapestry to reflect Edward then pledged to Harold that he should be king instead of William. Sometime later, Halley's Comet appears. In the Middle Ages, comets warned of impending doom. William hears of the betrayal and invades England. On the famous day, October 14, 1066, the Battle of Hastings took place 65 miles from London. Harold's army, which had been in northern England, marched to meet William, further exhausting his troops. Both armies were evenly matched. While William's horse was killed in battle, the English lose their strength as the day goes on, and Harold is killed. Then the English army flees. The Normans are victorious. The Bayeux tapestry is on display in a special museum in Bayeux, France. During World War II, it was kept by the French underground during the Nazi occupation and incurred damage, now missing 21 feet. The Domesday Book was the record of the English property and property holders across the realm. It was complete in 1086. Made for William and his government, it was similar to a census by our standards today. William needed info about the country he had just conquered. King William sent men all over England to find out how much each landowner possessed. One of the main purposes of the survey was to find out who owned what so they could be taxed on it. Keep in mind the Church of Rome possessed about 30% of the land in the British Isles. Until the 15th century, English ecclesiastics paid little in the way of taxes. The Magna Carta was originally an English charter from 1215. It is the most significant early English document. In time, this document would become the basis of constitutional parliamentary law of modern times. The creation of this document came about because of disagreements between the Pope, King John, and his English barons. The Magna Carta required the king to renounce certain rights and respect legal procedures, and most importantly, the will of the king could be bound by law. The influence of the Magna Carta outside of England is evident in the structure and spirit of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Henry II ruled as Duke of Normandy, King of England, and Count of Anjou. This is a present northern province in France. King Henry is best remembered for three main factors. Number one, instituting the royal practice of a judge rendering legal decisions on civil matters. Number two, producing the first legal compendium, which became the basis of English common law. And number three, replacing trial by ordeal with trial by jury. Thus, judgment is rendered by the community. It would be during this reign that Thomas Becket would be killed. King Henry disputed with the Archbishop of Canterbury and Thomas Becket over the church's authority that they had over the people. While Henry complained about Becket for years, in 1170, 4 of Henry's knights assassinated Becket on December 29, 1170. Almost half a century later, the landed aristocracy of England banded together in a political coup. They were tired of the government pursuing unsuccessful wars and the ever higher taxes they had to pay to support such endeavors. Evidence indicates Pope Innocent III supported the political position of the English barons and not the king. The English barons stormed on London June 10, 1215. King John signed a good faith agreement 5 days later to settle the grievances of the nobility and stymie the power of the military brought to London. A formal document was then created to cement the alliance of the nobility to their king. This was the Magna Carta. While the document did not keep the peace, it serves as a cornerstone from which the English government would develop. While King John had no intentions of honoring the arrangement, it was legally sound, at least for 3 months. All the while, the landed aristocracy was divided on the manner of the powers of the king and the limitations established in the Magna Carta. In a large section of the Magna Carta, called Clause 61, it states that the wishes of the monarch could be, in essence, vetoed or nullified by a committee comprising of 25 noblemen. Shortly after, the king died in 1216, and no serious move was made at this time to contest the will of the barons or the legality of the Magna Carta. In time, this committee of barons would evolve into the House of Lords, the upper house of the English Parliament. As Europe became a post-Roman civilization, it remained defined to one geographical area. While merchants had contacts outside of Europe, the whole of Europe did not. And by the 1000s, Europeans attempted to expand beyond the frontiers of Europe by conquering areas of the Holy Land that had been a part of the Roman Empire. As you may determine from this map, there were several campaigns in which at times European forces were successful, but largely they failed. Oftentimes, popes initiated collaborative efforts with rulers to assist the Byzantine Empire against Muslim efforts to expand. As with armies around the world, these efforts are costly. This rally call for warriors was made over a period of about 200 years. In brief, all 3 of the later Crusades were in large part disasters, and European forces were only able to keep the Holy Land for about 100 years. But in a broader fashion, this religious fervor united Europe in a single cause by monarchs who wanted to contribute to their own sense of patriotism and respect. So fighting a war appealed most often to noblemen and some women like Eleanor of Aquitaine. This queen was the wife of King Louis VII, ruler of France, before she married Henry II, King of England. This wealthy noblewoman, though the rumor has little basis for fact, apparently rode towards the enemy during the Second Crusade bare-breasted, otherwise known as the Greek Amazon style, leading several hundred knights. Nonetheless, like noblemen, this queen could offer her moxie for her people in her effort to save France and Christendom. By the 1200s, Church of Rome religious leaders debated what the proper course of direction the Church should take during the Middle Ages. Like all intelligently driven institutions, the Church considered issues that would aim to encourage religious piety while using their wealth and influence to combat Muslim expansion. The people experienced cultural changes in their practices of piety as well. Their worship of religious artifacts, symbols, and saints solidified to become 3 religious aspects. Number 1, worship of the saints. Number 2, relics. These are religious artifacts belonging to holy men, Christ, and or his family or bones. Number 3, a pilgrimage to a Christian cathedral. Saints, for their part, as a priest of the 13th century insisted, would be the sinner's guide in regards to achieving true piety. After death, the saints assisted the pious soul to heaven. The apostles of Jesus and the Virgin Mary were, and still are, the most popular saints among Roman Catholics. Closely tied to the veneration of saints was the worship of artifacts and bones. These historic items had belonged to or were associated with saints. These items we call religious relics. Monks and priests collected them for monarchs and princes for a price. Some nobles accumulated large collections. Keeping relics on display would enable common people the opportunity of saint worship more easily, exercising their piety to create a healthy soul. A monetary donation was customary to view relics, just as it is customary to donate money to museums or other institutions today that are self-funded. Over time, this church practice developed into a commercial enterprise. In time, collecting money for indulgences that were sold to churchgoers brought in huge sums. By the 1200s, priests encouraged believers to pay for an indulgence. This allowed the designated person, living or dead, to bypass time spent in purgatory. This was a hell-like place in which a sinner would wait, sometimes up to 500 years, before God decided whether to send them to heaven or hell. French-styled Gothic cathedrals created a godly presence here on earth. An obvious sign of town piety, as good Christians would aspire, would be to build and worship in a cathedral of their own. These building projects could last decades and cost millions to construct. These structures, made with local limestone to marble or granite, have lasted the test of time. The building of cathedrals fell within the monastic house movement that began centuries earlier. Mathematical engineering allowed cathedrals to imply that God's plan, such as this church, is perfect, as is His plan for universal order over chaos. A characteristic of this style would be the use of gargoyles or other sculpted figures with exterior supports known as the flying buttresses. These buildings tended to be narrow, long, and have two small side chambers, similar to the general shape of a crucifix. All the while it had tall ceilings giving it a vertical feel, with close walls and Gothic arches that allowed ceilings to seemingly reach to the heavens. Cathedral windows contained stained glass. This play of light affected the interior mood, depending on the time of day. Oftentimes the colored glass was arranged in such a way in which it artistically became an image that remembered a historical moment or person. A town's cathedral with its towers and spires could be upwards of 100 feet or more. These landmarks could be seen for miles, as it would be the tallest town building. Wealthy donors to the poor churchgoers paid for these cathedrals. On occasion, religious authorities secured long-term bank loans when necessary to pay for troop movements, when combating invading Muslim forces, or when building a cathedral. By 1206, the Mongols from Central Asia united under Genghis Khan. They would invade territories across Asia and Central Europe, south to the Holy Land. In 1241, the Mongols had reached Vienna. Eastern kingdoms fell because of their military effective strategies and the swiftness of their attacks. Speculation circulated that the Mongols had reached the north side of the Italian Alps. It seemed that they would likely attack throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Europeans did not know much about these barbarian invaders. Rumors suggested they were cannibals, or perhaps part animal, as they rode with swift agility on horseback while using their most effective bow and arrow strategies. While Europeans and Russians suffered invasions led by the Mongol Great Khan Ogadai in 1241, an unexpected thing happened. He died, and with his death the Mongols had to select a new leader. This event shifted Mongol attentions. They turned away from Europe and centered their invasion efforts on the eastern Mediterranean area. Here, the Byzantine Empire and Muslim forces were fighting for possession of territory. 4 years after the installation of the next great Khan, Pope Innocent IV would determine this might be a good time as any to send a missionary to meet with warrior bands. In 1245, Pope Innocent IV sends Friar Carpini to the Mongols. This visit would serve to offer to these horse-mounted warriors the Word of God. At the time, very little was known about the Mongols. By the 13th century, Mongols had conquered most of the Holy Roman Empire, to which Italy was the next likely target. Perhaps Friar Carpini could discover what the Mongols wanted or sought to achieve. Perhaps a peace settlement could be found, or could European armies exploit Mongol weaknesses if they had any? While written by a European observer, the story of the Mongols, whom we call the Tartars, is a source of history written from the time. As a primary source, it offers historical observations to readers, a reliable source of information. While Friar Carpini is biased at times, this is common of writing by outsiders of non-Christians. Nonetheless, this journal was to be given to the Pope on his return. As a visitor to Mongol camps between 1245 and 1247, Friar Carpini recorded events, behaviors, rulership styles, politics, along with factors tied to women, marriage, their horses, religion, diet, and their strong ties to honor and duty. Friar Carpini discovered tactics that included fear. On one occasion, he witnessed the Mongol practice of placing dummies, women, and children on horses in efforts to imply they possess a large mounted force. Friar Carpini discovered the Mongols were cunning and used trickery instead of brute force to achieve what they wanted. While they would lie to enemies and kill them once captured, truth among the Mongol bands was very important. The Mongol living conditions were harsh, and they frequently moved. This toughened them emotionally and physically. They lived in portable tents, while horses supplied them with transportation, milk, and blood and meat to consume if necessary. Carpini lived amongst them, traveled when they moved, and watched them train. This monk learned the Mongols desired more territory for their people, as they could not feed themselves on the land they had possessed in the past. In time, the Ottoman Empire would take possession of the peninsula of Anatolia. This area today is modern Turkey, the last remaining remnant of this empire that fell as a part of World War I. While Mongolian forces were busy ruling in Russia, this allowed the Turkish Ottomans to retain their independence and flourish over a period of years. By the early 1400s, the Ottomans were a force to be reckoned with. For years they attempted to conquer the capital of the Byzantine Empire, but failed. However, by 1453, Ottoman assailants killed the last ruling nobility. This event brought the Greek Orthodox Christian Empire to an end. This empire had survived for 1,000 years after the fall of the Roman West. Muslim forces had stymied trade and transportation routes. This weakened the ability of Byzantine residents of the capital city to effectively ready for an attack. By the 1450s, the Ottoman government had set their eyes yet again to possess the beautiful and strategically placed Constantinople. To aim to ready for an attack, Ottoman forces built a structural barrier that impeded seagoing traffic traveling from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. By controlling access and collecting tolls, ships could be refused entry and trade stopped, which anchored merchants from Venice and Genoa. By 1452, it seems the Ottomans were in control of the straits. It seemed obvious to observers that the Ottomans intended to succeed this time around. In a diplomatic move, soldiers were sent from a variety of European sectors in efforts to help Constantinople defend itself. Once the city was blockaded by the Ottomans, it seemed attack was imminent. While the city gates were ordered closed, help from the Vatican did not arrive as it was hoped. When the battle commenced, it has been estimated that the Ottomans brought an army of close to 150,000. By mid-April, 200 Ottoman ships arrived. It seemed Constantinople, with 50,000 local residents inside, would have to fight this war alone. Sources have indicated that prior to the attack, the Sultan demanded the surrender of the city, but the Byzantine emperor rejected this offer. A few days later, the battle for Constantinople began. After continuous bombardment of the city fortifications for 7 weeks, by the end of May, the city fell to Muslim invaders. Once the city walls were breached, the leading royals, including the emperor, advanced together into a sea of swords. They were not to return alive. Eyewitness accounts left to history evidence of the deadly violence and plunder that followed the fall of Constantinople in 1453. And for centuries after, Europeans would try and fail to regain this former territory of Christendom.